Joining this morning, my name is Scott Senseth. I'm the Program Director of the International Health Cohorts Consortium, and it gives me great pleasure to introduce to you today our speaker, Dr. Mohamed Zahir Alimohamed. Excuse my poor pronunciation. Dr. Alimohamed did his training at Manipal University in India, at the University of Groningen in the Netherlands, and at the University Medical Center in Groningen, where he got his PhD. He is now at the Muhimbili University of Health and Allied Sciences in Tanzania, where he's a lecturer and a biomedical scientist working on the sickle cell program. He's deeply committed to pushing the genetics and genomics agenda in Tanzania, and he's engaged in researching pharmacogenomics in African populations, antimicrobial resistance in Tanzanian communities, and the surveillance of rare genetic disorders in Tanzania. In terms of organizations, in 2017, Dr. Alimohamed co-founded the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization, and he currently serves as its general secretary. He's also a member of the African Society of Human Genetics, the Tanzanian Genome Network, the BOVA Network, the African Science Initiative, H3 Africa, and the Genetic Society of America. And lastly, but most importantly, he is the early career investigator co-lead of the Global Genomics Medicine Collaborative Workforce and Training Core Committee. Thank you very much for speaking to us today, this morning, Dr. Alimohamed.
Thank you so much, Professor Scott, and thank you very much, Latifa, for organizing this and for inviting me to speak to this august body regarding the progress that we've made in Tanzania with respect to the genetics and how do we integrate that into the healthcare. Just to confirm if you can, sorry, can someone confirm if you can hear me?
Yes, we can hear. If somebody not speaking, please mute.
We can hear you, but someone needs to mute.
All right, I think I can just get started. So as introduced, my name is Mohamed Zahir. I am a molecular geneticist and genetic counselor by profession. I'm a lecturer at the Department of Biochemistry and Molecular Biology based at Muhimbili University in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania. And I am extremely honored and deeply grateful for the opportunity to present what's happening in my country, Tanzania, as far as genetics is concerned, to this very international GGMC board, as well as participants. So, of course, when one talks about genetics, you can't really ignore the fact that the foundations of what we are seeing today in terms of genetics and genomic medicine and precision medicine was laid by Professor Francis Collins and colleagues such as Professor Craig Venter by initiating the Human Genome Project. This in itself was the largest biological consortium that was aimed to map out the entire sequence of the human DNA, and that is about 3.3 billion base pairs of DNA in 46 chromosomes. And of course, it goes without saying that the project itself took about 13 years, starting from 1990, ending in 2003, costing roughly about $3 billion. And in the process, apart from really having a human genome reference map, there were so many milestones in those 13 years that has become the cornerstone or the foundation of what we are currently using in our biological experiments as well as functional studies. So this really includes, for example, identification of BRCA1, BRCA2 for breast cancer, being able to identify the genome sequence of mouse, roundworm, the fruit fly, and many other species that we are currently using for studying biology as well as pathophysiology of so many experiments in our disease cohorts. However, what was really important post the Human Genome Project was the fact that it allowed innovations in chemistry, optics, and fluidics that subsequently enabled genomic scientists to be able to utilize sequencing platforms at a much cheaper rate. So while the project itself costed somewhere between $3 billion, but today, if we really want to sequence a human DNA or the genome or the exome, we are looking at around $500 US, and it is expected that in the next couple of years, the pricing of such sequencing is going to be lowered down to up to $100 per genome. And that all is thanks to the fact that there was so much innovation during the Human Genome Project. Now, obviously, when we see that the pricing of such technologies reduce, it is but clear that the number of genetic tests that will be available for the market are going to be significantly increasing. So in the year 1993, of course, this was when very, very few tests were available for testing of genetic conditions. And because of the fact that the costs went down, the optics were improved, the number of tests along the years really increased substantially. I am showing you numbers until 2013, but I think if we were to extrapolate today to 2024, this number has quadrupled to even higher numbers. And this is a picture that shows you the chromosome of the human DNA, including the 22 autosomal chromosomes and the sex chromosomes. And each circular block that you see next to the chromosome represents a position within the chromosome in which a mutation was found to be associated to a particular disease. So this was a picture taken in 2006, and watch how things change drastically as we go along the years. In 2007, 2008, 2009, we see a lot more number of variations that we understand from genomic studies that allow us to understand the importance of variation to causation of a particular disease. And this is what it looked like in the year 2019 for July, where almost every particular area within the genome has already been identified where a mutation or a change in the variation can be related or can be causated to a particular disease. And of course, the kind of information that one can get through the human genome DNA is not only understanding the normal variations such as the height, weight, and color, but also how does one react in response to medication? What is the probability that a particular variant will actually cause a disease? And in certain cases, direct connection between associating a particular variant to a particular genetic condition. Not only there, but apart from diagnostics, genomic information can also be used to develop new treatments, particularly by understanding drug-protein interactions. So as you can see through the Human Genome Project, there was a lot that was done that has become the cornerstone of how genomic medicine is implemented today. But today I'm here to talk about the genetic variation in the African population. I have been talking very positive about the Human Genome Project. Unfortunately, the process of the Human Genome Project in which the data was collected did not really benefit all the populations around the world, particularly the colored populations and the underrepresented populations from lower middle income countries, such as the African continent. Now, why is this so pertinent? And this is the basis of my discussion for today. So Africa is a continent of about 1.4 billion people. It's the world's second largest and the second most populous continent, with about 54 countries, greater than 3,000 ethnic groups, and over 2,100 languages that are being spoken in the continent. If we look at the statistics, 50% of the African population are children, meaning they're less than 18 years old. And by 2050, our statistics predict that 40% of the world's children will live in Africa. And therefore, that makes it a very interesting continent in the years to come. However, post the Human Genome Project, as I mentioned, we were not able to really benefit from the genetic reference data set that was created in downstream processing, whether that included diagnostics or therapeutics. And this has two main reasons. The first reason is that post the Human Genome Project, when more studies were being able to be conducted in which African populations were studied in depth, they were able to find that African genomes represented by these colored yellow to orange colors in these particular graph stood with a higher number of genetic variation when compared to any other population in the world. So our first understanding was that Africans generally have a higher number of genetic variants in their genome when compared to the rest of the world. But at the same time, when we start to understand the real depth of the genetic information obtained from African people, we are able to know that African people are also very diverse from each other. It's a picture that shows you chromosome 10, 11, and 12, mapping out the variation that was seen across different regions of the African continent. When we look at West Africa, the information, genetic information starts to look similar. But as soon as you move towards Central and South Africa, the variation starts to change. And the same would apply for East Africa, North Africa, Western Asia, and other parts. But if you look at the European continent, whether you are in the French or in Spain or in Russia, the genomic information or genetic information or the makeup of a person living in those countries are very, very similar. So the second information we got through these large consortium projects was that Africans not only have a larger number of genetic variation in the genome makeup, but also they are very diverse from each other in terms of the regions. Furthermore, a lot more studies were done later on to really understand through deep sequencing of people from the African descent. Projects like, that led by Steven Salzberg, as well as Neil Hanchard, Professor Michel, and Charles Rotimi, they have shown us that African genomes not only have more number of variants, but the Human Genome Project essentially missed out on up to 10% more DNA than the current human reference that has. So 10% of the DNA that is present in the African genome was missed out during the mapping of the Human Genome Project. At the same time, more than 3 million previously undescribed variants were found in these studies that were missing in previous studies. On that goes to show you that there is a lot more need to do genomic studies for African populations, where more and more number of variants can be detected that might have an influence on disease susceptibility as well as treatment options. So what did we learn post the Human Genome Project? We learned about the importance of genotyping, particularly from the perspective of the African genetic makeup. We learned about the importance of phenotyping. Now, remember, different diseases, even though a person can have the same diseases from different parts of the world, but phenotypically, the clinical characteristics are not necessarily going to be the same. So if you pick a child with Down syndrome in Africa, it's not necessary that the clinical phenotype will be the same as a child with Down syndrome from Europe. And so there's also that importance of an additional layer of information that needs to be captured. And if really Africa needs to be part of this discussion that we're now having about precision medicine and personalized medicine, then the road towards precision medicine is really by having local governments to invest into human genome projects within the African continent, so that we have information that's collected not only from a genotypic perspective, but also from a phenotypic perspective. And as a consequence of the lack of representation of the African population, there are several downstream effects. One of them is in terms of molecular diagnostics. A lot of patients today are not able to get the right kind of diagnosis. And many molecular geneticists working in Africa will be able to tell you that many a times when patients are being sequenced, a large chunk of that information is classified as variant of unknown significance, simply because I am looking at the genome of an African descent and I'm comparing it with the information that's available into these global genetic data sets that are predominantly covered with Caucasian information. And given the differences of the genetic makeup, it does not allow me to have enough evidence to classify those variants into pathogenic or benign, and therefore majority of them are going to be unknown significance. In certain cases, even some benign variants are being misclassified as pathogenic in certain genetic reports, particularly for cardiomyopathies. And that's something that is down to the fact that Africans are not well represented in genomic studies. The other downstream effect, which is also negative, is pharmacogenomics. Now, ideally, pharmacogenomics is a relatively new field whereby really the patient DNA information is obtained and utilized for production of drugs that are suitable for a particular genetic makeup, where you really want the drug to not have a toxic effect, but should show beneficial effects in terms of treatment. However, given the differences in the genetic makeup of different populations, the underrepresentation of these African populations are also hampering the potential for drug targets and drug development from pharma companies to be able to provide ideal and precise drugs for African populations. And of course, now we are also talking about genetic therapies, gene therapies. The problem is that many of these clinical trials that are utilizing genetic therapy products are not happening in Africa. And that also has to do with the fact that Africans are not well represented and they are not part of these initiatives where these therapies are actually brought in the continent for the people that have actually the greatest burden of some of these conditions from all over the world. Today, if we look at the regional information in terms of the population and the genetic therapy trials, you will agree and you will see in the first bar where the African population is high, but the number of genetic therapy trials is 0. Whereas if you see Europe, North America, Australia, it's the other way around. And this is something that is also a challenge. This is something that I keep on saying time and again, is something that is very, very important. Despite repeated calls that Africans are not well represented in genomic data sets, the number of Africans studies that do genetics do not have enough African populations. And that subsequently leads to Eurocentric bias. And this is something that was addressed way back in 2009, whereby at the time, about 1.7 million samples from 373 different studies showed that 96% of the data was in fact from European ancestry. Now, while Asian and other non-European countries have done well in terms of increasing their representation, where in 2016, the European ancestry information came down to 81%. But fast forward that to 2022, and you're seeing the problem getting worse for Africans. From getting 3% representation in 2016 to only 1.1% representation in these GWAS datasets from African populations. And that has not to do with the fact that Africans are not doing sequencing enough. I think the problem also lies in the fact that there is a not even paced out sequencing opportunities and equally paced out genetic studies that are done all over the world, where Europeans are far more faster than the African continent in terms of analyzing the data and sequencing these populations. But there are many, many pressing issues in Africa. First of all, we need to build research capacity for different types of genomic research, including infectious and non-infectious research. We need to improve our medical genetic services. We need to set up testing for congenital diseases. Some of these cytogenomic techniques that are currently considered as old school are not done routinely in Africa. We need to rethink about how we are thinking of ethics in genomics in Africa. The importance of biobanking for genomic studies cannot be overstated. And not only biobanking, but also how are we utilizing standardized biorepositories in our limited setting. We are also having challenges with regards to bioinformatics, pharmacogenomics, and of course, also the understanding of the genetic syndromes from these different populations. So in Africa, initiatives that were really taken by African geneticists have been instrumental. I can name quite a number of people, but I really want to take the name of Professor Charles Rotimi, who was one of the founders of the Africa Society of Human Genetics, through which multiple national societies were born. We have also the H3 Africa, which was a project that was funded by the NIH that really changed how genetics is implemented in Africa. We also have the Wellcome Trust Research Network, the H3A Bioinformatics Network, that's really a booming force when it comes to bioinformatic analysis through efforts of Professor Nicola Mulder and colleagues. And a lot of these initiatives are now beginning to really materialize on how we're thinking about genetics in the continent and how small steps are beginning to change how genetics can be implemented into routine healthcare. But the central message through all this is that it is very important that Africa's people must be able to write their own genomics agenda. And in order to really be able to write your own agenda, it is essential that the governments, national registries, and national bodies come together to invest and realize national genomic projects such that you have your own references for your populations, given how different the genomes of African populations can be. And subsequently, we should improve these representations into genetic data sets, which would then slowly allow us to improve our molecular diagnostics and the drug development options. Really, in terms of the roadmap for sustainable diverse genomic studies, we really need to implement at least 5 steps. We need to have a stakeholders engagement where we understand the needs of the community, the researchers. We need to build through infrastructure by really investing into computation and biorepositories. The government as well as funders need to have a strategic plan on terms of how we want to sustainably fund such projects. We need to continue to develop capacities in terms of training, knowledge sharing, bioinformatics, and many other things, including electronic data sharing. And most importantly, we need to really share data with the global consortia in a way that would be beneficial for the African population, as well as knowledge exchange. So let me highlight to you now what's really happening in Tanzania. So in Tanzania, and of course, the continent of Africa has a widespread of this disease called sickle cell disease. Sickle cell disease is a monogenic condition that's caused by a point mutation in the hemoglobin gene that changes the protein that makes the red blood cells from round-shaped to sickle-shaped or banana-shaped. And subsequently, these patients that undergo this mutation would have drastic effects such that they would lead to many a times death. And of course, the severity of the sickle cell disease is very, very much dependent on the environmental factors, but also the social and cultural factors. If we look at the numbers in Dar es Salaam, Tanzania, and Africa, 80% of the global burden of sickle cell disease is living in Africa, whereas in Tanzania, which is the 5th most highest in terms of the incidence rate, we've got about 11,000 children born with sickle cell disease every year, annually, in Tanzania. And unfortunately, more than 50% of those children will not make it past their 5th birthday. And therefore, this is a public health concern. If we look at sickle cell disease in other parts of the world and try and understand the survival pattern for sickle cell disease for those countries, we see that a lot of other countries are doing very well because they are optimizing the comprehensive care by providing hydroxyurea as a drug for treatment. They are also managing infection through newborn screening and have invested into bone marrow transplantation, blood exchange transfusion, and now also in the area of gene therapy. So really, thanks to Professor Julie Makani, who's been a pioneer in the field of sickle cell disease in Tanzania, we are now at a stage where we are actually discussing gene therapy for sickle cell disease in terms of research. And the way we go about this is we try and understand it from a clinical research perspective, what would be required in terms of the lab, what is it needed in terms of the logistics, and as well as partnerships with international and external bodies, so that there is a steady exchange of knowledge as well as the technical know-how into techniques like gene editing, which would be critical for processes of gene therapy to really be a success. Because apart from sickle cell, and we really utilized sickle cell program as an inspiration, the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization was formed. The mission of this particular body is to pursue and advocate for research and training, as well as increase awareness and consultancy in human genetics and the related field. If we look at the objectives of the organization, they are very active in the areas of research, awareness creation, knowledge translation, partnerships building, identifying genetic conditions that are pertinent in the country, what are the technologies that can be utilized in-house and outside for treatment or as well as diagnostics for those conditions. How do we ensure that through training, we are building capacity, not only knowledge-based, but also clinical and research-based? And if we look at the history of the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization, it was actually a birth child of the Africa Society of Human Genetics. Back in 2017, when myself and Dr. Siana met in Cairo in Egypt during the conference of the Africa Society, that was where we were really well groomed by then President Professor Michelle Ramsey, as well as the Secretary Professor Ambrose Wonkam, who really supported us through the formation of the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization. We then formally launched the society in 2019 in the presence of the then Deputy Health Minister, Dr. Faustin Ndugulile, and then in collaboration with H3 Africa and the Africa Society of Human Genetics, we hosted the 13th annual meeting in Dar es Salaam through a hybrid model, given the fact that at the time there was the COVID pandemic going on. So we had to keep it two options in terms of in-person for those in Tanzania and a hybrid model for those away. And officially, the organization is registered in 2021. The organizational structure of the THGO includes the executive committee that see the daily operations. We also have the board of directors and an advisory board that looks at the directions and the vision of the organization. We also have a technical unit in all of these operational areas that I will talk about. And we also have a communication and events team that are very, very instrumental when it comes to organizing events as well as disseminating information. If we look at the members of the people that are part of the THGO, slightly higher than 200 people coming from all diverse backgrounds, from medicine to biotechnology to microbiology, lab sciences, pharmacies, and a lot of the institutions in Tanzania are well represented in our membership. The organization is guided by the constitution that was approved by the registrar as a non-governmental organization body, but we also have an operational manual that allows us to take into consideration daily activities. Every year we do have the annual general meeting. Biannually we have the board's meeting, and every week we have the executive committee meeting. So let's get into now the detail of the operations. So as I mentioned, THGO really emphasizes a holistic approach when it comes to integration of genetics into the Tanzanian healthcare. And to do so, we have adopted 5 major pillars. The first one is research. We have training or education, advocacy or consultancy, we have diagnostics, and we have therapeutics. So let's see each area. In research, one of the major projects that is currently submitted for IRB ethical clearance at the National Institute of Medical Research in Tanzania is really to map out the human genome variation of the Tanzanian population. I have been mentioning that the African countries are not well represented, and this needs to change, and I think change starts home. So Tanzania has more than 120 ethnic groups, majority of them being Bantu speaking, but we also have the Nilotes, the Maasai, the Luo, and many other communities that come from different ethno-linguistic groups. Now, such diverse population has not been explored in terms of the genetic makeup before. And of course, we do know that these has profound impact on understanding the susceptibility or resistance to diseases and how this has adapted to different climatic conditions. So we are embarking on a project that will really allow us to determine the genetic variation present in the Tanzanian population. We're looking to sequence up to 20,000 people in our first phase, and hopefully we will then expand this to a lot more number of people on the Tanzanian country by really trying to analyze the number of people needed to cover the 127 different ethnic profiles. We also really want to make sure that we have developed and maintain a biorepository of these samples so that we can utilize this for the analysis of the human genome variation in the country. The other major project that we are also embarking as an organization is to create a rare diseases data set or a database. Rare diseases is something which is very close to our hearts. It's defined as 1 in 2,000 people that are living with the condition. And 80% of the rare diseases are in fact caused by a genetically predisposed variants. So globally, there are about 5,000 to 8,000 different types of rare diseases. But unfortunately, at the moment in Tanzania, we don't really have a clue as to which are the most prevalent rare diseases that we can find in our situation or in our setting. And subsequently, if these are the most, supposedly we would have the numbers, then how is it that we can help them? So what we do in this particular project, the idea is to develop diagnostic capacity within our institutions. We also want to team up with different patient organizations that represent different rare diseases and expand the care and treatment of the services that we provide. Particularly, we are focused on providing training to doctors and specialists, but also nurses, as well as find a way or a mechanism to work with the government so that the government helps in education of these children with rare diseases that are not able to go to normal schools, but also how best to help them in terms of inclusivity in the national health insurance funding. Tanzania Human Genetics Organization has also been spearheading the formation of the Tanzania Rare Diseases Network, where we partner with different patient organizations looking at the advocacy, awareness, and education and support for these patient groups. We also try and partner with different institutions locally and internationally to look at how best we can conduct research that would drive the innovation and public-private partnerships towards treatment and diagnostic options in Tanzania. The other areas of research is also understanding the role of education for genetics in Tanzania. We are at the point where we are now trying to analyze how much of genetics is actually being taught in the educational curriculum for university students taking health or allied sciences from different universities, almost 20 universities in Tanzania. We are interested also to mapping out what is the sequencing capacity in the entire country, as well as the bioinformatics capacity for those people living in Tanzania. And of course, within the research framework, we are very much interested to develop research policies so that we centralize how we look at genetics, because in the end of the day, the importance of data sharing towards implementation of molecular diagnostics cannot be overstated. And it is very, very important that when we move forward, we are not moving forward in regions, but rather move forward as a whole. Like any other international body, we are also guided by our KPIs, and what we are very, very interested in is also to develop policy briefs. So we've achieved one policy paper where we really spearheaded the development of the SADC-SIOF coalition, which is an organization that encompasses 8 different countries within the South African Development Network and almost 12 institutions within them, all of them representing different rare diseases throughout Africa. And we are very, very keen to develop more policy briefs on education, health, ethics, and regulatory authorities. Furthermore, we are very, very interested also in forming partnerships locally and internationally. We've already partnered with the National Institute of Medical Research, Zanzibar Health Research Institute, Commission for Science and Technology, as well as the Government Chemist Laboratory Authority. And of course, we've also signed a memorandum of understanding with different organizations, including specific organizations such as the Tanzania Oncology Society, Neurology Association, and so on and so forth. When we come to training, the THGO, in partnership with various other universities, have been spearheading the accessibility of training opportunities to our students through courses that have been offered by the H3A Bionet, such as the Introduction to Bioinformatics course, the Next Generation Sequencing Bioinformatics course, the African Genomic Medicine Training, Genetic Counseling for Nurses, as well as we've partnered with University Medical Center Groningen, where we've organized rare diseases for clinical diagnostics to 20 different hospitals, representing medical doctors and nurses on how best to capture, from a clinical perspective, patients that might have a genetic predisposition. We sincerely believe that by being able to train different cadres of health professionals, will have a holistic approach to what we would like to see in terms of implementation to healthcare in Tanzania. Furthermore, we've also taken one step lower, whereby we also meet with secondary school students or high school students through virtual career fairs or in-person career fairs, where we really talk about pressing needs for genetics in Tanzania to these students, so that we try and drive the message across in terms of what they can do when they join universities. Furthermore, in terms of training, we also write articles for the general public in order for us to educate them about the importance of genetics. And we do that through either Kiswahili, which is the national language in Tanzania, but also in English, where we try and write articles to newspapers, to magazines, as well as scientific articles talking about how genetics is important, why should one invest into genetics, and how can some of these things really change the mentality of our populations and culture, whereby the belief on voodoo and stigmatization is still quite high. So we work with religious bodies, we work with schools, we work with universities, and try and provide information in different platforms to really change that mentality and really bring people towards understanding of what human genetics is. At the same time, we don't only work on these platforms, but we try and also assist universities in development of curriculum. For example, recently, the Tanzania Human Genetics tried to develop the Masters of Science in Bioinformatics curriculum at Muhimbili University. We were also very instrumental in the launching of the Bioinformatics Hub of Kenya. We have done multiple trainings at the Government Chemist Lab, as well as the Tanzania Vaccine Institute. And many a times through different platforms, we try and talk about genomics on the context of genomics revolution in Africa. And every Friday, we also have our journal club that allows different students from different calibers to join and learn about genetics from a different perspective. And as you might have seen, we are very active on social media platforms where we provide information on specific diseases that are genetic in nature, or hot topics that are hot in that particular period of time, or representing certain days that we would like to commemorate. And we try and release information on our platforms, such as social media platforms, YouTube's, as well as websites, so people can really understand what these genetic diseases are and how to really try and help people with that. In the future, we are also looking to develop workshop for nurses on genetic counseling. I do not believe that that there is one shoe fit for all. And of course, having said that, Africa has special needs, and that those needs need tailored solutions. So if we look at the burden of the medical doctors and the population of the continent, it is almost impossible for doctors to conduct genetic counseling. And therefore, what we've seen is that the nurses have a much more bigger role to play when it comes to genetic counseling. And what we've also realized is that it is not necessary that all nurses need training on all diseases. So what we've done in terms of being able to have a larger workforce of genetic counseling in Tanzania is we've trained nurses into different areas. So if you have a nurse that works in the oncology sector, neurology sector, pediatric sector, or the obs-gyn sector, we try and tailor the genetic counseling workshop as well as short courses for those nurses to do the preliminary information taking, pedigree analysis, and so on and so forth, so that there is some screening happening from a nurse's side when it comes to genetically predisposed conditions. Within the training, we are also very, very much interested in developing a framework by the end of this year. We've already established collaborations with multiple institutions inside the country, such as MUHAS, DIT, but also internationally through Wellcome Connecting Science, University of Groningen, and the American Society of Human Genetics. The achievement as far as the 2023-2024 in training is concerned is that I've mentioned we've already organized the African Genomic Medicine Training, IBT gene therapy course, as well as the clinical diagnosis of rare diseases workshop. And we will continue to develop more courses for such as variant interpretation and other courses through the partnerships that we have developed internationally, but also locally. And most importantly, we are also targeting to have students that will be mentored by people that are part of the board, that are part of the EC, so that they can get also their BSc, Masters, and PhD degrees in the areas of human genetics, and therefore also be participant of the human genetic initiatives that are happening in the country. The third area that we are very active in, and I think this is one of our biggest strengths, is advocacy. And within the advocacy network, we try and implement two steps. The first thing is we try and have a high-level advocacy. When I say high-level advocacy, means that we try and meet politicians. We try and speak in their language. We try and understand what would be required if you want a politician to really understand the language of genetics. and that is to do with economics. So how much money are we looking to invest? How much money are we losing should we not be implementing precision medicine? How much money are we gaining should we be implementing genetic testing in the country? What is the burden in terms of the costing of the healthcare system, and so on and so forth? But at the same time, we are also trying the second approach is towards the low-level awareness creation, where we meet with patients, we meet with people waiting at the hospital lounges, we meet with parents, we meet with people on the streets to really talk about genetics and what they have understood about it. And through initiatives such as commemoration of the Rare Disease Day, with patient organizations such as Ali Kimara Foundation, we were able to have in presence the former president of Tanzania, His Excellency Dr. Kikwete, but also we've had multiple opportunities to meet with the ministers of health of Zanzibar and Tanzania, as well as the president of Tanzania, Mama Samia Suluhu Hassan. We've also been able to establish collaborations and partnerships with Zanzibar, with the National Institute of Medical Research, with the Commission of Science and Technology, but also through international offices of the government of Tanzania in different parts of the world. At the same time, we have actively participated in commemorating rare diseases, not only in mainland Tanzania, but also in the island of Zanzibar. We've partnered with multiple patient organizations, such as the Malcolm Foundation for blood donation drives, whereby we really release some of these information as pamphlets to make people understand the importance of blood donation towards treatment of patients with genetic conditions, as well as being active partners and active contributors to discussions about implementing precision medicine in Africa through platforms such as the EU-Africa Personalized Medicine Consortium. And I mentioned we've also been very active in the SADC Rare Disease Group. We were one of the founders of the SADC Region Patient Organization Group with 8 countries and 11 organizations. And we've also released a policy paper that will bring together patient organizations to talk about their needs and how we can help each other towards making sure that patients with rare diseases have the right diagnosis, they have the right treatment opportunities, and that the children that are suffering from this have an education and access to insurance. This was a picture that was taken during a rare disease commemoration, where we partnered with multiple organizations and patient groups together with the former president of Tanzania and the speakers and multiple representatives of the government of Tanzania. And therefore, we encourage many other countries to also try and implement, in terms of advocacy, both a high-level advocacy approach, but also a low-level awareness creation through really talking to the grassroots. And I really want to thank Dr. Annette David, who has been the lead for our advocacy initiatives in Tanzania. This was one of the papers we published that talks about the national call for action to address the policy and urgent needs to improve the lives of affected individuals. We talked about the importance of having the demographic data, the kind of infrastructure that needs to be developed for diagnostic services, what areas of research would be important, and then subsequently how policies and public education can have a role also in the areas of rare diseases. And one of the success stories that I really am proud of and I'm happy to tell is that in the year 2022, our president, who you see on the picture, Dr. Samia Suluhu Hassan, announced that the Minister of Health will now subsequently have a budget that would be passed by the parliament looking into the education and hospitalization needs for children with rare diseases in Tanzania. And having that as something that was passed by the parliament and was part of the budget for the fiscal year 2022 was a huge milestone for Tanzania, whereby the government really had a buy-in in terms of how we would like to approach patients with rare diseases and what is really required in terms of developing infrastructure for Tanzania going forward to really implement genomic medicine. In terms of the advocacy activities, we are also still continuing to develop policy frameworks and identify more partners nationally, but also internationally on how best to get the ball rolling even further. We've also partnered with the Lupus Foundation, Epilepsy Organization, the Malcolm Foundation, Ali Kimara Foundation, and have organized already 3 scientific conferences, 2 Rare Disease Day commemorations, as well as a national stakeholders meeting that took place in November last year, where we really brought forward all the stakeholders in human genetics in Tanzania and tried to advocate for the quick and adaptation of human genetics into the healthcare system. One of the other areas that we are very active on is diagnostics. Within the diagnostics, and this is something that I really want to share with the rest of the African continents, if they're listening, is that first, before going out of your country or before going out of the continent, try and establish or map out what are the existing capacities in your own countries. In Tanzania, when we started the evaluation of what are the capacities in Tanzania, we have the MUHAS Genetics Lab, we have the Tanzania Genome Network, which has already a lot of members from different institutions. We have the National Public Health Laboratory. We have different infrastructure capacity, given that there was a lot of sickle cell diagnostics that was being done. We already have some bioinformatics capacity, and now we have even more next generation sequencing machines that are present in different institutions in Tanzania. So we were very pleasantly surprised when we started mapping out the capacity, internal capacity that we had. So instead of really knocking out of the continent, we started knocking doors within the same country. And when you find that certain things are probably not available, we were not very far from calling Professor Leon Mutesa, who lives in Kigali in Rwanda, or calling Professor Michelle Ramsey, who lives in South Africa, in the neighboring countries of Tanzania. Services provided at the moment in Tanzania is paternity testing, forensic biology through the Government Chemist Lab Authority. We also provide high-resolution HLA typing for kidney transplantation. There are also sporadic small pockets of molecular diagnostics, which are research-based, done at KCMC and Muhimbili University. And we also were very surprised to see that there was some form of genetic counseling that was already being done for selected diseases. So in the end, what we really needed to do was to bring these stakeholders together, get them to talk to each other, and see how best we can work with each other. The other thing in terms of diagnostics that we were able to do was also to develop a draft diagnosis framework for Tanzania. We developed documentation for consenting and counseling, both in Kiswahili and in English. We found champions who were then certified genetic counselors, identified partners within the country, but also in neighboring countries, and established an MOU on how best we can help patients get a timely diagnosis for the genetic conditions. But in a screenshot, this is how the genetic testing in Tanzania is organized. When you have a patient who is suffering from a genetic condition, he or she will come to the doctor, to the clinician, who then suspects the genetic condition, then is referred to the Human Genetics Organization. The patient then is getting a second review by the board, and supposedly this is indeed a genetic-related condition. The THGO will reach out to either partners and the patient in terms of providing free genetic counseling, as well as utilize the existing capacity at the MUHAS Genetics Lab for sample collection and DNA extraction. This sample is then either, depending if the test can be done inside the country, so we will send it to that particular institution, or if the testing is not happening in the country, then we will contact one of our partners, whether in Rwanda, whether in Kenya, whether in South Africa, or whether outside the country, so that they can help us with this genetic testing done. And of course, we have arrangements with many organizations that provide us with raw data, so that we also use that data that will be fitting into the training opportunities for our own bioinformaticians. An entire step is governed by data collection procedures, consenting processes, and documentation that would allow us to do this in a legal way. And in the end, once the results are out, we then discuss that result with the clinician, and we help the patient with genetic counseling. As of now, in terms of diagnostics, over 30 patients have been counseled. And of these 30 patients, more than 50 family members have been involved in genetic counseling. We are in the process of making mini cohorts of diseases, conditions that are in the making. We have already worked with over 13 physicians from different specialties who are located in almost 9 to 10 different hospitals. We have done over 7 genetic tests, and 10 more are in the pipeline for the next 2 months. We've solved 3 cases. One of the papers have already been published. 2 are in the process of being written. And if we look at the diversity in terms of the number of cases we've seen, you can see from the deletion syndrome to Hashimoto syndrome, we've got everything included in our database. So if someone really wants to understand what are the basic steps to establish diagnostic services, I think it is important you first identify champions, local champions, find an opportunity to train them, start small and really focused, map internal stakeholders, engage what is your local capacity to doing this, then try and seek partnerships, whether it's internally or through collaborations through the organizations such as Africa Society or other organizations. Make sure you have good documentation in place and start to implement with caution, whereby you know that not all genetic tests will solve your problem. And of course, we still have in place the issue of the variants of unknown significance. And so you should also talk to your patients in a way that you do not promise them anything, but at least you have some kind of reasons for them to understand what they might be suffering from. The last part of the operations of THGO is therapeutics. Now, this was something that was not part of our initial plan, but we were challenged when we had also a special senior advisor, the former president of Zanzibar, who is also a senior advisor to the Tanzania Human Genetics Organization, Dr. Alimohamed, and he challenged us that why not also have therapeutics? So this was officially added as a focal area. And here we are really trying different approaches in genetics to target underlying genetic abnormalities, including genetic therapies. And we want to integrate the therapeutics into the activities where we start to train people on in silico analysis of some of the genetic information to identify drug targets. But at the same time, we also want to establish a database of the essential drugs that are mostly imported from outside into Tanzania, and how we can then help the local pharmacists and work with them towards mapping of the existing and required infrastructure resources in the country to really implement therapeutics in Tanzania. So if we look at the real core values by 2025, I think it is important that we get stable in research. We have the training and education as one of the important pillars. We also have the genetic diagnosis in place. Thereafter, we have, by of course being successful in advocacy, we'll be able to then develop therapeutics for our market. In terms of the opportunities, there is a lot of opportunity to invest into basics, BSc, MSc, MHD programs. We need to work with our government and external partners to develop infrastructure, training, technology, share our resources, and find a way to translate our research into routine diagnostics. And that is the true way, I think, we will then be able to implement precision medicine in Tanzania. So really, to summarize, what I've been trying to say is that currently genetic and genomic databases are really not optimum for diagnostics and treatment of African people. And to really fully realize the concept of precision medicine, Africa must be present. And when I say Africa must be present, I mean the government must be present, the local pioneers and authorities need to be present and be active contributors. The field of genetics and genomics in Africa is, of course, growing, but it is nowhere where we need to be, and more must be done and can be done. In the end, I just want to say equity in genetic research is not only the smart thing to do, but it is also the right thing to do. So with that, I just want to drop our website, thgo.or.tz. And if you have anything that you would like to partner with the Tanzania Human Genetics, you can write to us or follow us on any of the social media platforms. So with that, I just want to really thank all the people, all the organizations that we work with, that we partner with. And with that, I'm happy to take any questions. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Mohammed, for a very, very impressive and complete overview of the Tanzanian development in all these different research areas that the Tanzanian Human Genetic Organization has carried out. I'm very impressed. I mean, you're hitting on all the important points: research, training, advocacy, diagnostics, and therapeutics. That's just amazing. Any questions? Please raise your hand and we will call upon you, or put it in the chat. Nothing. I have a question for you, Mohammed. One of the things you mentioned was sickle cell anemia and the prevalence within Tanzania and the rest of the African continent. And you also mentioned gene therapy trials being a very low number outside of the US and Asia, really. And we know that there's very many new sickle cell gene therapy trials that are ongoing in those countries. Is there anything that you think can be done to try and get some of those trials going on in Tanzania or in Africa?
Thank you so much for that very, very important question. And I have personally been a very huge advocate for being able to bring these trials in the continent that actually carries the greatest burden of sickle cell disease in the world. And of course, through the pioneering of Professor Julie Makani, we've been having high-level discussions with partners, with companies like Novartis, with companies that actually produce these genetic therapies for treatment of sickle cell disease, such that we would like for them to bring those therapies in Africa, where we now already, and we feel we are ready with the infrastructure, with the knowledge of the people that would be required starting a trial, but also capacities in terms of lab, clinics, nursing, and other facilities. We might have a breakthrough probably in a year or two from now. I'm not sure how far we will get, but this is indeed a discussion that we are having on a daily basis on how best to make sure that Africans are also part of these clinical trials, particularly on those diseases that have the greatest burden in the continent. And I'm also very grateful that we are able to partner. For example, Muhimbili University is partnering with the American Society of Cell and Gene Therapy to organize gene therapy courses. This is already one way to make sure that our own researchers, faculty, as well as students understand the importance of genetic therapies, and subsequently that will develop interest for them to take this in a much deeper level of education and come back with that knowledge and implement it in the country.
Wonderful. We are near the top of the hour. We have time for maybe one more question. If anyone from the audience listening would like to raise their hand or type it into the chat, that would be great. I'm not seeing any questions from the audience. Again, this is very complete, Mohammed. I think that I identified a few areas that our organization, the Global Genomic Medicine Collaborative, would like to probably partner with you, particularly in your nascent cohort in Tanzania that you're starting to build to look at human genome variation within your country's population. The International Health Cohorts Consortium is something that I think you might want to consider joining, because there's lots of information there that may be helpful to starting your cohort, all the way from biobank training to research collaborations that you can establish outside. And lastly, I think that the rare disease project that you do have ongoing could very well mesh with the rare disease project that we have in our Global Genomic Medicine Consortia ongoing right now. And I know you're already part of our training and workforce work group, so I'm sure that you'll find out more about that and try and get into it. If anyone has any questions, I think they can probably reach you through the Tanzanian Human Genomic Organization, and you provided us with that website. So again, thank you so much for this wonderful tour of everything that's going on in Tanzania.
Thank you very much. And it's absolutely my pleasure to be part of this group and share knowledge about Tanzania. Thank you very much.
Great. Latifa, I know you had one announcement that you'd like to make.
Yes, again, thank you, Dr. Mohammed, for this great and insightful presentation, and congratulations of having the government's buy-ins in improving the human genomics in Tanzania. So yeah, I would like to announce the upcoming webinar. We have an exciting session planned for June 27th. I put this information on the chat box. And this presentation is going to be given by Dr. Kalmadi Guanardena. And the topic of her talk is the value of genomic results in rare disease patients, a Sri Lankan experience. Invitation will be sent out soon, so please keep an eye on your inbox and be sure to register and encourage others to join. We look forward to your participation, and thank you again for attending this webinar.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you, everyone, and have a good the rest of your day. Thank you. Bye-bye.